All right, so today we're diving into the world of Pedro Chirino. He was a Jesuit missionary in the colonial Philippines right around the turn of the 17th century. And his story, wow, it gives us this amazing look into a really complex cultural encounter. It's all about what happens when an ancient faith meets a brand new world, not on some battlefield, but in the currents of a river and the twists of a riddle.
Okay, let's start with this quote from Chirino himself, because it just sets the stage perfectly. For him, being a missionary wasn't just a job. It was a total transformation. It was about being, spiritually annihilated, broken down, just so you could be rebuilt in a new land. I mean, you can just feel the stakes here, right? They were incredibly high for everyone involved.
And this gets us to the central challenge, what we're calling the missionary's riddle. Think about it. How do you even begin to translate your faith for a culture that already has its own incredibly deep beliefs, its own language, its own way of seeing the world? I mean, we're not just talking about learning vocabulary here. This is about trying to navigate a completely new reality.
So when the Jesuits showed up, you've got to remember, these guys were trained in classical rhetoric. They were masters of persuasion. But then they meet the Tagalog people, whose language Chirino himself just raved about for its elegance and subtlety, and whose culture was just packed with these complex riddles. So yeah, this was definitely not a blank slate. We're talking about a super vibrant, intellectually sophisticated society.
Which brings up this really critical question, right? In a world that's all about riddles and multiple meanings, how do you tell one true story? Everything you say, every parable or miracle, it could be filtered through a totally different cultural lens and take on a completely new meaning. And this whole challenge, it's captured perfectly in this one kind of chilling story from a riverbank. So, let's get into it. The crocodile story. This is really the centerpiece of our whole explainer today because it shows Chirino wrestling with this exact problem of meaning, like in real time. And what's wild is, it's a story he actually told twice, and he changed it to fit how his own understanding of his mission was evolving.
Okay, so picture this. It's a hot day in the Philippines. You've got a group of new Tagalog converts, and they're all just bathing in a river. Then, all of a sudden, the church bells start ringing. It's the call for evening prayer. So, most of them, they get out, they get dressed, and they start walking toward the church.
But there's always a but, right? One guy stays behind. He kind of laughs at his friends and yells out, "Hey, bring back something for me," which was apparently a local way of just totally mocking someone. So he's there, all alone in the water, while his friends head off to pray. And you can just feel the tension building, can't you? What's going to happen to the guy who scoffs at the new faith?
And here's where we really see the missionary's dilemma in action. In an early report, Chirino tells this story as a pretty straightforward cautionary tale. Mock God and you'll be punished. A crocodile attacks, the man is killed, simple. But, and this is the weird part, his body's left totally intact, which his friends see as a miracle because they were praying for him. Okay, but then, a few years later, Chirino retells the exact same story in his big, formal history, and the focus just completely changes. Now the tragedy isn't just that the guy got punished. The real tragedy is that he was killed before he could give his final confession. The crocodile is now just an instrument that denies him a proper Catholic death. So you see what he did, right? He's now using the story to highlight the absolute power and necessity of Catholic ritual. He literally reshaped the same event to teach a totally different, much more specific lesson.
So that raises the question, right? How did a missionary like Chirino even build authority in this completely new world? Well, one of the key Jesuit strategies was this idea called exemplarity, or imitatio in Latin. Basically, the idea was to pattern your own life and your own actions on the lives of ancient saints. It was their way of saying, hey, that incredible power you read about in those old stories, it's here, right now, with us.
And here's just a perfect example of how this actually worked. Way back in the 3rd century, there was this saint, Saint Gregory the Wonderworker, who was famous for supposedly moving a massive rock just by praying. Okay, fast forward centuries later to the Philippines. Pedro Chirino is dealing with a village that he believes is plagued by demons. So what does he do? He doesn't move a rock. Instead, he persuades the entire village to physically pick up and move. We're talking homes, the church, the whole shebang, to higher, safer ground. See, he's not just telling them about the saints, he's reenacting their power in a way they can see and feel, something that's real and relevant to their own lives.
But Chirino's problems weren't just coming from the local culture. No, he was also stuck right in the middle of a pretty fierce rivalry between different Catholic orders. And get this, even the ultimate sacrifice, martyrdom, became like a competitive tool.
If you look at what was happening in nearby Japan at the time, you can really see this deep ideological split. On one side, you have the Jesuits, like Chirino.
Their whole strategy was accommodation. Learn the language, adapt to the local customs, kind of keep a low profile so you don't tick off the local rulers. But then you had the Franciscans, and they took the exact opposite approach. They were all about big, public, spectacular displays of faith. We're talking open preaching in the streets, making a big show of their poverty for everyone to see. For them, a glorious public martyrdom was the best sermon you could possibly give. But for the Jesuits, that was a total strategic disaster that could put the entire mission at risk.
Okay, so this brings us to the big takeaway. After navigating all of this stuff, the riddles of language, the problem of interpretation, even the rivalries inside his own faith, what was the ultimate effect of all this on missionaries like Chirino?
And this is where it all clicks into place. The name Tagalog itself actually means Taga Ilo, which translates to people from the river. And the core idea of the research we're looking at here is that in the process of trying to convert the Tagalog, the missionaries, well, they were the ones who were fundamentally changed. To really truly understand the people, they had to dive right into the culture, into the river, you could say, both literally and metaphorically. So they came to convert, but they ended up being converted too, and is something totally new. They became rivermen themselves.
And that's really the thought I want to leave you with. So often we think about these kinds of cultural meetings as, a dominant force and a passive one. But the story of Pedro Chirino shows us something way more complex, something reciprocal. It wasn't a one-way street at all. It was more like a river current, flowing in both directions, and it changed everyone and everything it touched. It really makes you ask, when you're doing this deep, difficult work of cultural translation, who's really converting whom?